Thanks, Tony. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're standing. As Tony said, I've lived in the region for 15 years, and like I'm sure all of you, I love this area. I was raised with strong social justice values, and I'm standing for the Greens because it's a party that stands for those values. Working with Kingscliff TAFE in educational disability support, I've seen firsthand that people have all sorts of needs and they need different levels of support.
Is the sound okay? Can I just check? Too loud? Yep, no. Okay.
The Greens believe that support is a human right, and greater equity also leads to better social and economic outcomes. The Greens' priorities for Tweed are better services, sustainable regional development, supporting community participation in decision-making, and banning coal seam gas in the region and across New South Wales. Tweed is a growing region, and the Greens support the community in ensuring that with the population growth comes the necessary infrastructure, like new schools, better funding for TAFE, and an upgraded Tweed hospital. Public schools and TAFE are the backbones of regional education, providing the grounding for local children and the skills and qualifications we need for local economic development and for our young people to stay in the region. The Greens support a dramatic increase in school and TAFE funding and the implementation of the Gonski formula. Thanks to the community, Tweed Hospital will finally be upgraded, and the Greens call both for a clear timeline for the funding to be released and a commitment towards staffing levels to take the pressure off our public health workers who are committed to providing this essential service. Sustainable regional development is vital for Tweed to create a livable and resilient community, to be self-supporting as a region, and account for climate change risks. Our plan for Tweed integrates better public transport, clean industries like solar, better infrastructure planning, and affordable housing to create a vibrant future here. The Greens will dedicate $100 million towards community transport in New South Wales. Public transport is a necessity in the regions for younger and older people and those with disabilities in particular. Our energy policy supports a quick transition away from fossil fuels and towards decentralised, efficient energy production from renewable sources. Tweed will benefit from increased investment in solar, community energy generation, and reduction of our reliance on costly poles and wires. Our affordable housing and homelessness policies recognise that everyone has the right to appropriate, affordable and secure housing. We support integrated housing planning and appropriate regulation of the private rental market to keep rents affordable and to prevent homelessness. Environmental issues are also social justice issues. Climate change will disproportionately impact vulnerable people, like older people in Tweed, and we must plan to address this. As long as Dart Energy's coal seam gas licence still covers parts of Tweed's water catchment, it's a risk to our food, our water and our well-being. The Greens will ensure drinking water safety for Tweed residents and food production security for our valuable red soil farming areas. We are the only party that will ban CSG in the region and across New South Wales. So vote One Greens for a caring community, clean air, clean water and clean politics in New South Wales.
Thank you, Tony, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about the great Tweed. I'm very passionate for the Tweed. In Parliament, I'm known as Mr. 100% for the Tweed, and I think that passion for your local area has got to go for 100%. I'm not opposed to opposing my party if it's going to affect my local people, but I'm a firm believer in this place, the great place called Tweed. We do have issues here. We're one of the fastest growing regional issues in the state of New South Wales, and with that comes challenges. Challenges to provide an efficient health service. I'm pleased with recent announcement and even ongoing support for our health professionals out there. We've also had a significant involvement in our local schools because it's important. Every investment in schools is an investment in our children, which is ultimately an investment in our future, and that's very important. I have a passion for the local environment. I support our local koalas, and I support a clean environment, not a polluted environment. And I've often said in that debate, I live here, my family lives here, my friends live here, I drink the water. The last thing I want to do is to support any industry that would damage that environment out there. I think we've got a fairly good record over the last 4 years in providing new school facilities. We've provided dental health facilities here and so on. But the challenges are coming. We've got around 20,000 new home sites ready for approval in this area. We're one of the fastest growing regional areas, and I think it behoves any state government to ensure that proper planning is put in place. And I'm pretty sure we're well on the way to do that. But it's not so much of getting up here at a candidates forum or getting out on the street or having a glossy brochure. It's about having the money to do it and the will to do it. And I'm proud to say that. Also a bit of a believer in seeing things firsthand. Whether it's homeless, I've gone out on the streets here from time to time, and even now, each week I'm in Parliament, I go down and spend about 3 hours down at the Matthew Tower at St Vincent de Paul there, just so I can understand it. In the past I've done trips in the local back of a police car, in the Tweed at 5 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's done just so I can understand it, so I can be an advocate, because I'm a strong believer, if we can keep our community strong, and support them, in fact, we'll be a lot better place to live. But above all else, we need to be able to generate jobs. A lot of our social issues in that, if people have a job, if people have an income, then they'll be able to use that money for affordable housing and for goods and services there. So I'm also mindful of sustainable development, which is what we need. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your listening this evening.
Thank you very much. For me, this election, not just for me, but also for the Labor Party, is about core business. It is about making sure that we have the health services that we need now and into the future by making sure that the Tweed Hospital is fully upgraded. It's about making sure that educational opportunities are accessible to everyone by making sure that we have a well-planned, properly funded education system, and especially including TAFE. Restoring funding to TAFE and making sure that the contestable, privately contestable portion of the TAFE system is capped at 30%, so that the great work that our TAFEs do can continue to be done. There's been a lot of pressure on our public services and systems. We have population growth here. That's not new, but it's certainly continuing. And it is a never-ending task to make sure that the services that we have are able to keep up, not just for now, but going ahead into the future. I'm passionate about making sure that those services are fought for, that they're protected, and that they're provided to people in an equitable and accessible way. I grew up in a household where education made a world of difference. I was the first person in my family to achieve a bachelor's degree at university. I saw my mum, who'd been a stay-at-home mum at that stage for over a dozen years, return to education at the age of 51, end up with a bachelor's degree in community development, pull her local churches together to create an emergency food bank service to help people who literally couldn't afford the groceries that their families needed to survive, to access those. She took education, she gained skills from it, and then she made a direct investment back in our community. That's the sort of opportunity that education can provide, especially for our young people, obviously, who depend on it to get the grounding that they need and then the skills that they need to succeed, whether it's to get employment, whether it's to start businesses or make other community contributions in that way. I stand here as someone who believes in education, who believes in government-provided health services, properly planned, properly funded, and there and secure for the people who rely on them. Thanks very much. Labor Party has a proud record of establishing and investing in public housing across the country. That's something that I would certainly like to see continue here in New South Wales. Housing always has been a complex issue. When you see shifts in the economy, particularly here when the Gold Coast market skyrockets, we get immediate population pressure here for people looking for more affordable population. I think there's a role there for government in making sure that that is accessible, but also that the accessible options for affordable housing are actually known to people. There needs to be proper coordination of those sorts of services, and we certainly need to work with organisations like yours to make sure that every possible opportunity to provide affordable housing for people is available.
Affordable housing is a really important social equity issue for this area. We have seen rising homelessness. I've spoken several times with John Lee, who's a very active advocate for homeless people in the area. And what's really important is that a preventative approach is taken. It's also very important to provide facilities like the drop-in centre that John's been lobbying for when things get to that point. But I think as a society we really can afford to do better than that. The Greens have some policies around affordable housing. And we've had a policy announcement on this recently, which is a proposed Renters' Rights Act. So that would limit excessive rent increases by allowing no more than one rent increase a year, cap rent increases at no more than the Consumer Price Index, and increase security of rental tenure through an end to no grounds evictions. In terms of housing for young people who are particularly vulnerable to homelessness if they're in difficult circumstances, where our policy is to provide immediate adequate funding for emergency and permanent youth accommodation services, develop and implement a funding strategy for youth accommodation services, and increase options for affordable and quality accommodation for single pregnant women and young mothers under 25. And that's just a small portion of our Greens housing policy.
Thanks, Andrea.
Yeah, look, I think it's a very good question. It's always the term affordable housing. Exactly what is affordable housing? It's a very difficult subject to get round. I guess the best way to answer your question there is one, in terms of social housing, increase amount of investment in provision of social. And let me be the first to say, my government and even my personal view is that governments should stay out of providing some of the social housing, because the non-profits, such as an organisation like you, do it far better than the government. So you'll see a great deal of emphasis to give you the assets, to give you the money to provide a lot more social housing, because the way you guys do it is better than we do it. In terms of creating affordable housing, I mean, there's a number of ways. I'm quite proud to say that we've got a whole raft of planning laws through. I think a way through the planning laws, etc., is to make provisions where developers get credits for providing a certain amount of affordable housing within their estates. You may or may not know that we've got around 20,000 new home sites about to be approved here. And under the old planning laws, there's no affordable housing in there. It's just going to be market dictates. So to work with you guys to have credits involved in that, I think goes a long way. And just finally, I think an emphasis is on providing jobs. If people have got jobs, we had affordable housing just down the road here. And I think your organisation was involved in that. And we struggled to find tenants. You know that. We struggled for months. We had affordable housing, but no one could qualify because they didn't have a job. So that's the way my government would fix it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Geoff.
So employment is difficult in a regional area. There's some areas which are promising, and particularly what the Greens are interested in is developing sustainable employment opportunities that are going to support Tweed into the long term and support it to be a sustainable community. So some of the approaches to that would be tourism. We've got a very active and healthy tourism industry here, and particularly we can develop ecotourism, get the NBN rolled out, of course consulting with communities about where the towers are placed, and also solar. We have ideas like community energy initiatives, where it's actually community-owned energy, and that can provide local employment, which is truly locally owned, and that's a great way to keep the funding in the local region. In terms of Indigenous employment, the Greens have a strong view that the Indigenous people deserve all the rights and equality that the rest of us enjoy, and it's really important to close the gap. We're looking at fundamental services for Indigenous people to get them to support them to participate in the ways that they choose. So that comes down to supplying specialist workers in the health area who are culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate, prioritise children's health and early intervention in community situations where it may be needed. And specialised training for Indigenous people to help them to develop the skills that they need to develop their own economic projects or businesses.
Thanks, Andrea.
I'll pass it over to Geoff now.
Look at
First, last one.
yeah, okay. Look, employment. You've really got to attract businesses here. You've really got to attract private enterprise, small business. Foster that. Don't tax them out of existence, and try to create an environment where a small business comes, and the majority, there's 3,500 small businesses within 5 k's of where we're currently sitting. Each of them employ 5 or 6. So you've got to make an environment where they're going to invest in the local people and create those jobs. In terms of Indigenous people, what we need to be able to do, I regularly speak to our Tweed and Byron Land Council. Currently they're looking at various initiatives to employ, particularly within the tourism industry. They need some guidance within that, and also they need some capital to start. So they're looking at different avenues. Currently they've got a significant amount of land that they control, and they're in discussions with the government at the moment about creating that employment opportunity. But you're not going to do it unless you have an environment with your planning laws, with the Tweed Shire Council and with the state government to get those people to move to this area to employ people. I know it sounds difficult, but I think we can do it. I think the North Coast has set itself up as a fairly green and mean environment in terms of sustainable energy, renewable energies, IT particularly. I think that's a big goal for this region. We're ideally placed to do that with the airport and the Gold Coast and things like that, and the NBN rolling out. So that's where I think the real future for us is, to create that environment, to create investors and investment, to create jobs so we can have employment for our future generations.
Thanks, Geoff. Ron? I think Geoff is absolutely right about creating the right environment. We actually have to look after our environment here if we're going to protect and grow our biggest industries. Tourism-related industries, our agriculture industries are heavily dependent on our clean and green reputation. That's why people come here, and that's why those businesses have the opportunity to thrive. We've seen unemployment on the north coast of New South Wales across the four north coast seats here of the Richmond Tweed statistical region rise from 6.5% to over 10% in the last 4 years. It's a devastating impact. One of the things that Labor will do will be to permanently ban coal seam gas extraction on the north coast, so that doesn't stand as a threat to that clean and green reputation for both our tourism industries and for our agricultural industries as well.
Thanks for that question. The Greens don't support the building of a new dam at Beryl Creek. We understand that that land has been earmarked for that, but that was done from thinking from a long time ago. More modern ways of thinking about water usage, and particularly water conservation, provide us with lots of other solutions. So we have water efficiency. We can really greatly reduce the amount of water that's used, and that's a really important thing to do. for not just it's increasing the supply is a bit of a blunt instrument. It's also very expensive to build infrastructure well before it's needed. Now, in terms of water quality, we do have some ways that we can address that, which are really clear. We can fence the cattle out of the creeks, just to make sure that our catchment areas really are clean. I understand that there's been a very high quality water filtration system installed by Tweed Shire Council fairly recently. And yeah, there's many other avenues that we can explore for reducing our water usage and improving the water quality before we go. Using a lot of state and ratepayer funding to build a very large infrastructure that won't be needed for a long time into the future.
Thanks, Andrea. Ron, have you got a response?
I'm not convinced at this point in time that we do need a new dam at Birrell Creek. I think we've seen relatively recent examples through the water crisis in southeast Queensland through the early to mid 2000s where significant changes in consumer behaviour based around an education campaign on the need to conserve water were able to make a significant difference to the amount of water that is consumed while we were still able to keep the economy running and keep our lifestyles intact. So I think there's probably more that we can do potentially there before we need to jump to the building of the dam.
Thanks, Ron. Geoff?
David. Look, I think we should just keep all options on the table. The National Party recently announced a $1.2 billion water infrastructure that will see 2 new dams actually be built out west. I think it behoves the fact that that land was bought many years ago by a forward-thinking Tweed Shire Council. I think it should stay there, designated for a dam, and I think we should look at all different options involved in it. As I said, water security is key to development, key to the environment, key to so many things. Our life is water. So to answer your question, Don, I'd like to see all options put on the table and reviewed on a regular basis.
I think we do have to look at all options for what's possible in terms of the conservation of water and also the practical capture and use of rainwater. We don't have a specific policy at this point in terms of incentivising the installation of rain tanks. I think a lot of education around what's possible would certainly help with that. I think people would see the benefits for them both economically and environmentally to do so, and we should make those options well and truly available and known to people.
Thank you, Andrea.
In the discussion about water usage in Tweed that's arisen from the debate about whether or not to build another dam, there's been a lot of talk about how we can save water, and I understand that it's possible to put into planning provisions for the new developments, particularly what are called the greenfield developments, where there's no current infrastructure. You can put in underground water tanks, you can hide the sound of the pumps, you can really do significant low impact water storage that makes those communities a lot more self-sufficient and greatly reduces the infrastructure costs that need to be provided beyond the boundaries of those new communities. So I think that's a great way to go. In terms of recycling water, I would just go to the science. If there's appropriate procedures applied to assess the cleanliness of the water and it's deemed usable for whatever the purpose is, I'm going to place my faith in that. And if somebody gives me a glass of water and says it's recycled and it's clean to drink, and I've assessed the process that's gone through and feel that it's a suitable process, then I will drink that water.
Yeah, look, I think it's a very good question. I don't know whether you're aware or not, but for the last few years here in the Tweed, you actually get development credits when you build a brand new house if you plumb it, one to take rainwater, and also to use your grey water, which is the purple pipes under your house for your gardens and that. So you actually save money by doing that. The only other thing I'd add with rainwater tanks, if you remember a number of years ago, there was a government incentive that gave you actually money to install a rainwater tank. Unfortunately, it was widely advertised. I thought it was a brilliant idea, but the Tweed was one of the least areas that took up that in terms of installing rainwater tanks. And currently, and I do think this is something that needs to be addressed, it's cheaper to pay excess water rates than pay for the electricity to pump the water out of your rain tank for your own personal use within your house. So there is some inequities there, but there's already a process in place where by installing those type of systems into your new house, also with double glazed windows, insulation, environmentally friendly houses, that you do get a return in terms of your planning. So yeah, look, I'm fully in support. I think there should be more to be done, but there's also a fairly significant education program that needs to be continued out there for wider acceptance of some of those practices.
The Petroleum PEL 445 licence covers an area that's within a few kilometres of Curry Hall Dam. I'm concerned about the water table, I'm concerned about the water catchment. We get our water from there for the Tweed electorate. I think it's vitally important that we protect that water resource and make sure that we head off any possible risk to it.
Thanks, Geoff.
That's not in the... Is
Look,
there a Tweed electorate?
Look, in the Tweed electorate there is no coal seam. There's never been a coal seam licence. That's a Tweed electorate. I mean, we inherited, when we took power, basically coal seam gas licences right across our great state. What we're working for is a coal seam gas-free northern coast. Recently, over the last few months, we got rid of 14 licences there the other day, another 2. We knocked over 48%. We're continually looking at ways to protect the North Coast, and protect, I mean, by removing any of the old licences, and my government didn't do it. It was previous governments that did it for $1,000 or so, trying to get rid of them. We have a plan in place. It's an expensive plan, but we have a plan and we're working for it.
Yeah, I would agree with Ron's statement. The underground water flow doesn't respect electorate boundaries, and if we want to be able to grow food here in Tweed in the future, we don't have that much agricultural land left. A lot of it's gone under housing. The land that we've got is very good, and the last thing that we want is, because that water will make its way to the coast underground, and the last thing we want is to see it destroy farmland. In terms of the party position on coal seam gas, the Greens will ban coal seam gas right across the state unequivocally. We see it as a toxic industry for many reasons. It's a danger to our future. It causes significant greenhouse gas emissions, and it's just the last gasp of the dinosaur fossil fuel industry. The National Party and Labor Party have both at different times strongly supported coal seam gas, and the National Party continues to do so, and they're only running scared due to the significant community opposition at the last minute.
Yeah, look, public transport's always been a significant part of my direction. I'm pleased to say that we've been working very hard with our current bus suppliers to make a seamless border where the people in the Tweed electorate will be going on to the Queensland system of a go-card, also removing any of the barriers for some of the community providers that crisscross the border. In terms of school kids, we campaigned very hardly and were successful. The number of our disability kids here that actually go across to Coolangatta Special School, they're now covered by the New South Wales transport system. I think in terms of the rail, we've looked at the rail a long time ago, 4 or 5 years ago. The costs are there. There's been a considerable movement with the provision of a rail trail, which is gaining momentum outside my electorate, gaining momentum in Wollumbar, Byron and so on. But I think to have a healthy style And I've always looked at actually Envy with the heavy rail and the light rail coming down. Believe it or not, in the future they'll actually come into the top half of this electorate. My vision for the electorate was to have that continue down the coast, down to the high population growth areas, to ensure that there is adequate public transport. Currently, I think stage one is with the buses and also the other forms of community transport such as taxis and so on.
Public transport is essential in regional areas for so many reasons, social equity reasons, so younger and older people, people with disabilities, and other people who don't have access to private car transport can get around. The Greens have focused very much on shifting from road to rail, particularly for freight. Freight greatly increases the cost of building and maintaining roads, and if we can get that heavy freight off the roads, then it improves safety for road users also. It does make sense to extend the rail corridor from Queensland down south along the coast. With respect to the rail trail, the Mooloolaba to Casino line, I've heard many statements that the economic feasibility studies have not been particularly well done. And there's a lot of sympathy and support still in the area for the reopening of that line. I would support the opening of a rail trail so long as there's a possibility for dual use of the corridor, so that that land is not alienated as a rail corridor, and also that absolutely must be the case that the land is not legislated to ever be allowed to be sold off, because currently it's protected. It's really important to keep public lands in public hands. In terms of transport generally, particularly we just want to make it more accessible to young people, make it cheaper for young people, and also increase cycleways and other facilities for people to get around that are active transport as well as passive public transport.
Thanks, Andrea. Right.
I definitely support maintaining the rail corridor for a potential future when our population base and our economic base might be viable for train services to return. I certainly strongly support the closest possible integration of our bus system with the Gold Coast and South East Queensland system, so that there is the best possible array of services available there. Accessibility has to be the key. Making sure we get our proper share of funding for public transport is a key. When you're a long way from the capital city and we have such a high dependency on the motor vehicle, that's not going to make the transport accessible for everyone, and that's a fight that has to be had day in, day out, week in, week out, to make sure that we get it as good as it can possibly be.
I guess all I can say about that is that it would be great if there were more. I'm actually not fully aware of the current bus routes. If there's the quality and quantity of bus transport available between those two centres, but clearly they're the two biggest population centres once you've crossed the border that are close to each other, and it's really important that we have some kind of facilities for that. And it would also be good to have a bike path between those two areas.
Thanks, Geoff.
Look, there is bus services currently. The issue really gets back to the amount of people using it. I've ridden on the buses from here down to Pottsville and beyond, and at times they're very little utilised, so there's a number of issues there. But I think the most effective way is an effective bus service between there, but then it gets down to the fact of the cost. But I think your organisation is extraordinarily good, and I think I'd be very strongly in support of some further subsidisation to ensure that those young people got there. Recent times we had a night bus that used to run from Cooley down all the way down to Pottsville there, and it went away because there was lack of use. In terms of cycleways, yesterday or the other day we just announced a new cycleway down there on Fraser Drive. So I'm a big supporter. There's a growing industry of cycling within our local area, and I think more cycleways should be created along there.
Thanks, Geoff.
I certainly agree that as much support as we can give for a bus service between Moranbah and Tweed, the better. That demand issue is certainly problematic when it comes to making sure that you've got sufficient, regular enough services to meet the need, but at the same time you're not running empty buses backwards and forwards. So I think when we're talking about specific access to services like yours, as much as possible, making sure that we bring together all the organisations that can specifically benefit around transport around certain times and to certain hubs to make sure that services like that are accessible when they're needed is vital, and I'll work hard towards that. I don't, at this stage, have a Labor Party commitment to build a high school in Pottsville, and so because of that I'm not going to make one. I do note that in the days before the last state election, Geoff made some very strong statements in which he said that he believed the demographers and planners at the Education Department who didn't want to build a high school at Pottsville were wrong. We need to convince them that they're wrong, and I believe we will. It was just days after the last election where he indicated that he'd met his promise to the people of Pottsville and the families of Pottsville by getting them a meeting with those very same planners, and that was it. I don't think that those families feel that they got the representation that they wanted on that issue. I think that there is a strong argument for a high school in Pottsville, but as I said, I'm not prepared to make a commitment on one unless I'm able to deliver.
Thanks, Geoff. I'll get your response.
Look, I think Pottsville will eventually get a high school. I have no doubt about that. But currently, for the last 2 years, nearly 3 years, our secondary enrolments have fallen. Kingscliff 3 years ago had around 1,200 kids. At the moment, they're just bordering on 1,000, and they'll actually drop below that this year. The last figures I got was only a few days ago. If we were to create another secondary high school in Pottsville, that would cause a shift of up to 300 to 400 kids. What that would mean in Kingscliff, one of the closest ones, and also Moranbah, a shift of kids there would cause change in the teacher-student ratio. And this has been confirmed by the Director of Education and also a Regional Director and the principals. Therefore, Kingscliff would not be able to offer advanced mathematics, science, engineering, dance, theatre, a lot of the specialised teaching roles. So therefore, there would be a detriment to the educational outcome for the kids. There wouldn't be the opportunity. Now, we've had a number of candidates up here, including myself, so it's all about giving the kids an opportunity for education. What would happen if you created one today? You would have a downgrading of the educational opportunities. And I, for one, stand very strong behind creating those educational opportunities for those kids. Pottsville will get another high school in the near future, but the 5-year prediction, and this has been verified by all the principals here, shows that for the next 5 years, that the amount of secondary enrolment remains static, if not falls off. Doesn't mean that may change through some other factors, but at the moment it is standard. So I want to see the best outcome for our kids, all right? And I stand very proud. I come from a long family of public education and support that, but I want to give the kids of the Tweed every opportunity possible.
Thanks, Geoff. Response?
I guess, yeah, I've also been contacted by Corinne recently and got some background for this. So I have a lot of sympathy if teenagers are having to hop on a bus and travel a considerable distance each way. That's going to really lengthen their day, and it's not going to probably provide the best educational outcome for those children. So I think what we're seeing here is potentially a conflict between what are the interests of some children and what are the interests of other children, and however we address that, it just needs to be looked at in a holistic fashion and say how can we create the best outcome for as many of these kids as possible.
Thanks, Andrea.
Well, we've been advocating very strongly for dual reticulation in greenfield sites. Now, I understand that the perceived barrier to that is somewhat increased cost to the developer in putting that infrastructure in, and so there's been a lot of resistance. But the Greens feel very strongly that the costs that are incurred in terms of infrastructure on the community need to be fairly matched by developers, and it's a perfectly reasonable request. So we would really love to see mandatory dual reticulation in greenfield sites. I understand that there's a possibility that there'll be a slight increase to the cost of housing sites due to that. But I think that cost, considering the future that we're looking at, is worth it.
Okay, Geoff.
Look, I'm a bit hesitant to make it a law for dual reticulation. I mean, just moments ago we were talking about affordable housing and keeping the prices down and things like that. I think what we've done so far with credits for developers, with rainwater tanks and other environmentally friendly things there, I think is a way to go. I think dual reticulation will come in time, but I'm also mindful about passing on those costs to the consumers, particularly in this region, particularly where a lot of our houses are pretty price sensitive. I agree with your sentiments, but I would stop short of demanding legislative change to make it mandatory for dual reticulation. There are a lot of benefits there already where you can get credits for building on those greenfield sites, and you'll find a lot of greenfield sites now. Developers are now marketing the environmental pluses on that.
Thanks, Geoff. Rob?
I certainly support the encouragement of it. I too would have concerns about mandating it, because there's a balance argument to be had there. I'm not sure exactly where the balance point is in getting that right between the water conservation and still ensuring that the affordable housing objectives that we have can be met. If the mandate on a developer to get that done pushes their profitability past a certain point, then you risk developments just not going ahead, and that of course puts pressure with the population wanting to come here. That puts pressure on housing prices and could have detrimental effects that we know not of. So I still think education and encouragement towards those things as opposed to a mandate is probably the better approach.
Yeah, there's two parts to it. Look, people can currently apply for, I think it's 29 days or 28 days emergency accommodation from the Department of Housing or Housing New South Wales. And then Housing New South Wales have a number of providers that can provide that. They're either motel forms and so on. A lot of the agencies are looking beyond emergency accommodation. They see that as a stopgap measure and not really addressing the real issue of homelessness and why people are homeless. So there's a number of new initiatives about staying at home and also with our social housing policies that are starting to take a real effect. To give you an example in this area, and to quantify it, we have a great provider out there called On Track. Last year alone, On Track had 1,400 people come to them and say they were homeless. Of that 1,400 people, they managed to house 84%, which is a significant figure. Some were temporary, some were emergency, and some were long-term. So there is a lot of work being done in that field. That's what I said earlier about allowing the non-for-profits to do what they really do best in that area. For example, St Vincent de Paul, Fred's Place, just up the road, I've asked them the precise question, do they want emergency accommodation? The answer was no. They didn't want, they wanted to continue the current level of the services they operate there. So there is emergency accommodation out there. People can apply for up to 28 days for it.
Thanks, Geoff. I might get you to respond to that now, Andrea.
I can just say generally as an equity issue and an important support base for people in crisis, that it's important that emergency housing be available and provided when needed. And also that we're looking at ways to avoid those situations from occurring in the first place, whether they be through economic crises, whether they be through domestic violence, which is a very, very major cause of people seeking emergency accommodation, women and children leaving domestic situations where then they're just not able to stay. So it's heartening to see that domestic violence has become more prominent in the dialogue recently, and certainly support for families, outreach services, early intervention, funding of social services that really get in there and start to prevent some of these problems from happening in the first place is also really important.
Thanks, Andrea. Ron?
Critically important to make sure that there's proper funding for emergency intervention for people when that's required. Homelessness is such a difficult issue because there are just so many possible causes. Every homeless person has an individual story to tell about what led them to be in that situation. It also takes so many different forms. It's not you don't have to see someone camped with all their possessions on the footpath to be homeless. That's not necessarily what homelessness is. We have people moving from house to house, friend to friend, family member to family member, trying to make things work, trying to get it together. The range of services that those people need don't necessarily just come down to they need a place to sleep tonight, although making sure that that sort of crisis accommodation is available is very important. One thing that Labor has pledged at this election is to restore funding to some organisations that have had a cutting back of their funding under the state government's going home, staying home reforms, but it is a very big and a very complicated picture. Some people need help in terms of how to be better capable of applying for jobs. Some people need skills, some people need training, some people need help with financial counselling, some people need help coping with traumas that might have led them to ultimately to a situation of homelessness. It's a broad and very complex picture, and one that governments need to move heaven and earth to make a difference in.
Thanks very much for that, Ron.
There's been a large number of reports done, but basically the reforms currently in there, with going home, staying at home, is a reform of the specialist services. Over the next 3 years, we're investing just on $500 million to tackle homelessness in New South Wales. The reforms mean more money, better services delivered to the area of greater need. One of the things I'm quite proud of with the current government, I believe there is openness and transparency in terms of figures. I've attended a number of homeless forums, both here and also in Sydney, where a lot of the data is coming out there. For the first time, resources are being allocated on evidence and not on history. So by doing that, the data will be available. I've seen no real evidence of data being hidden, particularly on census. The reforms mean people in need will get the right help where and when they need it, and I think that is a critical situation. I think really, and also we're delivering our homeless youth assistance program, which will mean more services and better outcomes for unaccompanied children and younger people under 16. So I think we're moving to deal with a lot of those issues, but I think we are moving also to be open and transparent and do it on the right help at the right time on the right evidence.
Thanks for that, Geoff. Ron?
With data, governments by their nature collect a great range of data on a whole range of things. I think that after step one of ensuring people's privacy, particularly in relation to issues like homelessness, domestic violence, absolutely critical. But after that, definitely that sort of data should be actively available to the services that could use it to provide a better service and a more targeted service.
Thanks, Ron. Andrea?
Possibly what we're looking at here is a question of the resourcing of those government departments that collect the data, and also the priorities and how they go about, well, first capturing it and then communicating it, so how it's interpreted, how it's packaged, and how it's then passed on out to the community. So if there's deficiencies in that process, then that's what needs to be looked at. It would be a real shame if we did lose the census in its current form, or it became less regular. That's really, really essential information, and we do need evidence-based policy, and we need the evidence to have the evidence-based policy. In the absence of that evidence, policy can be based on just about anything, and that's not the way we want to go forward with our planning. Look, it's always tough in regional areas, particularly as we are just sitting here over the border. You can see as soon as you drive past the sign that says "Welcome to New South Wales," the difference. I think that what's a big contributing factor to that is the slashing of funding to TAFE. And we could certainly do better in our provision of education, just so that those young people can come through, first of all, really get a good grounding when they go through school, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And then we really need skills, vocational skills and training to be available at a high quality level and low or no expense in the local area, so that people can be trained in the areas which are particularly promising for employment in Tweed, like the tourism industry, hospitality, provision of renewable energy like solar installation, and small business enterprise. There's just so many fields. There's internet-based work like graphic design. The TAFE really is a fantastic provider of that. If we can restore adequate funding to that, then I feel that will really increase the employability of local people in the region. It's not that people don't want to work. A lot of people have 2 or 3 part-time jobs. And also we need to attract businesses here who want to employ those people. But I feel that there's also a lot of people have come to the region who do have a high employability. They've come from urban areas looking for a sea change or a tree change, and their employment opportunities aren't out there. So there's 2 sides to this equation.
Thanks, Andrea. Ron?
I think employability is absolutely the right word for it. We should be talking about it more. We have a lot of people who, through education, through training, are able to make themselves more employable. The TAFE sector is absolutely critical to that. TAFE has a great record over many years of helping people skill up and be more prepared and more able to get jobs that they previously weren't qualified for. Under this government, we've seen slashes to TAFE funding. We've seen cuts to the number of people working at TAFE. We've seen cuts to the teacher hours for some of the people who are still working at TAFE. Labor has pledged that it will restore funding to the TAFE system. It will also cap the amount of the TAFE system that can actually be contestable by the private sector, so that there is still a core strength in the government-run TAFE system that can provide that great service that it's done for many years. I think that's going to be important to making sure that those great outcomes that TAFE is able to get for many people is still possible now and into the future. Labor has also pledged to reverse the fee hikes that we've seen for TAFE courses and to bring those back down to 2014 levels, so that those fees don't act as a disincentive and as a barrier for people being able to upskill in that way.
Thanks, Ron. Geoff?
Look, I'm a great supporter in our TAFE colleges. Roger, I understand what you're saying here, but we've got to create an environment that people come here and employ people. I think it can be addressed with the current planning regime. We've committed, and over the last 4 years, every new piece of red tape, two restrictions go off. We've got to make it easier. And in terms of training people with TAFE, our TAFE college at Kingscliff last year had a record number of enrolments, up on the previous year, and so on. And this year, I've been advised by the North Coast Area Director that the enrolments are extraordinarily strong. And there's a commitment from my government, if enrolments are up, the appropriate resources will be put there. Currently, there are 46,000 extra positions in TAFE across the state of New South Wales. And while the previous government, Labor, will talk about increases, etc., under their regime in the last 4 years of their government, the cost of most TAFE courses went up 200%, and in terms of Cert 4 courses, it went up 500%. So there's clearly a record of misinformation, but it's all about creating that. People get jobs because investors and investment occurs in your local town. If there's no businesses to employ people, no one will get a job. And traditionally, our regional areas always experience a fairly high level of unemployment. In terms of this area, we do have a great migration. A lot of people are moving into this area on a regular basis. Each year we've got the fastest growing population in regional New South Wales, outside Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. In terms of the Gold Coast also experiences employment issues up there. It is not all rosy up there, I can tell you that now. But it's about creating that environment to get those people to come here, establish sustainable businesses so they can employ both our current people and our future people.
I think you're absolutely right. Programs that are successful and get the outcomes that they're designed for should continue, absolutely. I think the solution to that is to really push for longer term funding agreements so that programs actually have the chance to get up and running, settle and get really good at what they're doing. Not that they're necessarily not good at to start with, but you build a skill base in the provision of a certain service, and that builds a benefit over time, not just because of the skill of what they're doing, but then the networks that they're able to make with other services and other parts of the community. I think we have to lose our obsession with thinking that a private tender is the solution to all ills, and that putting things up for private sector contestability is always the best way to get the best outcome for a program. So I think we have to have a good look at that and perhaps look in more detail at the specific local successes that we're having and make sure that we support them better.
Thanks, Ron. Geoff?
Look, I mean, you've always got my full support to keep the funding for those relevant services, but I also say that we continually need to look at those services and ensure that they are providing value for dollar and they are hitting their mark. I know your organisation, Tony, and I know a number continually do that. I'm proud to commit to our local area, proud to commit to the levels of funding. It is difficult when you start blending Commonwealth funding and state funding and so on with it. But I think where there's a need and a demonstrated need, and what I've seen particularly for the non-for-profits over the last, say, 5 to 10 years I've been involved with them, they've got far more professional in terms of their delivery of service, but far more professional in terms of their accountability and transparency. I think over the last 5 years I've met with more non-for-profits than most other organisations within our town. They do a great job and they need our 100% support. But at times it is difficult to go through that with national trends. As you'd be aware, there's with the NDIS is coming along. Now that's a great system for disability people to allow them to control their own thing and their own direction in life. With that alone in the state of New South Wales, that will probably see another 15,000 jobs created in that sector alone. And there's a strong commitment from my side of government to ensure that the current providers of those services are well placed to continue on into the future. Because it's estimated that there's, after 2018, there'll be another 50,000 clients involved in that sector, which will make it, there'll be a lot of opportunities, but we need to ensure that the non-for-profits, particularly in the regional areas, need our support to survive and flourish into the future.
Thanks, Geoff. Andrea?
What the perception often is in the community when a program like the Real Skills program is cut, and I was there for the launch of the Real Skills petition recently, so I saw two young girls stand up and speak about what a difference it was making to their lives in terms of their confidence, in terms of their leadership, in terms of giving them knowledge that they might not necessarily be able to access either through the school system or through their own personal networks and their family background and so on. But it's just such an important program. It's got great economic benefits, and the question is how to measure those, account for them, and how to defend the rationale for that funding. And what the perception in the community is that when it's time to assess funding, it'll always be the social services that go, and the eyes are just closed to what the benefits are. So maybe the answer is in producing better evidence or prosecuting the case better for the long-term economic benefits of those programs, which are very likely to be substantial. And maybe also the Greens certainly feel that that's the kind of policy we should have, is investment now for a long-term economic and social benefits into the future.
Thanks very much, Andrea.